Okay, we're continuing now סימן Zion in the Shagged Aryeh. So we saw in the last year the Gemara a few times, and then we discussed a couple of the issues that we have to clarify. And so let's just go over that real quickly. Let's see how we should do this. The Gemara, let's go through step by step outside. I guess we'll do that. I'm going to follow my outline here. We had a mission about someone reading Kriya Shema, whether he has to hear the words that are coming out of his mouth. The Tanakama, which he says, the Shita of Yehuda says that he's Yotzei if he doesn't hear the words that comes out of his mouth, and Rabbi Yossi says that he is not Yotzei. And the Gemara says that this is based on how they darshan the pasuk of Shema. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Shema teaches us that you can use any language, but it doesn't say anything about having to hear what you say. According to Yossi, it's coming to teach us that you have to hear what you say. Plus, adds the Gemara, and this is going to be an important part of the discussion tonight, Rav Yossi also learns that that you're allowed to say it in any language. So Rav Yossi learns two things from one pasuk. So that's an important part to remember. Okay. Then we brought all sorts of different Mishnayos and Braisos and tried to figure out who fits into what opinion, and it's all revolving around what Shitas Rabbi Yehuda really is. Is he only B'diavad allows you to say Kriya Shema this way? If you did it, you're Yotzei, or L'chachila he allows you to say Kriya Shema without hearing what you say. Rabbi Yossi, it's clear that he's the most machmer, and he's going to answer it even B'diavad. So we had the case of a Cheresh taking Truma. There it's only a din in the bracha. So the bracha is for sure not Ma'akiv the mitzvah. So you want to say that could be the Shita of Yossi, that the bracha is invalid, but the Truma is valid. We're assuming that Rabbi Yehuda would allow you to say a bracha in this way without hearing what you're saying, even l'chachila. The problem is that we have a brisa that says a person l'chachila cannot say birchas hamazon by thinking, but b'diavad, if he says birchas hamazon by thinking, he's yotzei. According to what we set up until now, that we just have two extreme shitas. Rav Yossi, who is the machmir, and says you're never yotzei if you can't hear what you're saying. And Rabbi Yehuda, which allows you to say it quietly, even l'chachila. So then who's this Mishnah, this brisa, that is a middle shita with birchas hamazon? So then we say, even if we want to say that's the shita of Yehuda, we have a problem from the case of Truma. We brought a brisa that a cheresh is a person that can speak but can't hear is allowed to take off Truma l'chachila. So that's the most mekel shita. So now we have three opinions. We have the case of Berachas Hamazon, which is the middle shita, and we have the case of the cheresh taking Truma, which is the extreme mekel shita. We only have one opinion for those two shitas. Rabbi Yossi is going to be the extreme machmer shita. So how does it work? So we bring a sheet of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that he holds you need to hear what you're saying l'chachila. He's speaking about a case of Kriya Shema, and he darshans the pasuk of Shema is what it sounds like from the Gemara. And Rabbi Meir in that brisa is of the most mekel shita, that he doesn't require you to hear what you're saying even l'chachila. And once we have that, we have now three shitas. We could put Rabbi Yehuda with his Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and the way it works that Rabbi Yossi is the most machmer, that you're not yotzei if you don't hear what you're saying. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the middle shita, that you do have to hear l'chachila, but if you say it quietly, you're yotzei. And then the most mekel shita is Rabbi Meir, that holds that you can say whatever it is quietly without hearing at all. Then we brought a Mishnah in Maseches Megillah, which speaks about the cheresh reading the Megillah. And over there it says that he's not allowed to read the Megillah. And again, we go through all this discussion. Is that not allowed b'diavad? And that would be like the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, or maybe something like l'chachila. It could be maybe Rabbi Yehuda. If Rabbi Yehuda holds that of the middle shita, then we go through all the back and forth until we come out that it is true. Yehuda could hold like that middle shita, which is that you should say Kriya Shema loud enough for you to hear, but b'diavad, if you didn't, you're still yotzei. Okay, and so that was the sugya. We wanted to know this middle shita, which we paskin like, right, that we saw later in the Gemara. There are chista paskins like this shita, that you don't have to hear what you're saying, b'diavad, but l'chachila you do. So is that a din d'oraisa or a din d'orabanan? If it's a din d'oraisa, So then we would have the concept of Kol haroy lebila bila ina ma'akeves. Kol she'ina haroy lebila bila ma'akeves, which is a mashal used from the halachos of Karban Mincha to say the idea that if the Torah requires something, l'chachila, so you have to at least be able to accomplish it, even if you don't actually accomplish it. Like the case of mixing the mincha, you have to be able to mix the mincha, even though you don't have to actually mix the mincha. So over here, we would say that a person who has the ability to say Kriya Shema out loud, but chooses not to, he could be Yotzei B'diavad, but a Cherish, who it's impossible for him to hear what he's saying, he would not be able to be Yotzei Kriya Shema even B'diavad. That's the way it would be if the din of saying Kriya Shema l'chachila is D'oraisa. If we say it's only D'Rabbanan, so then it's a din D'Rabbanan that you have to hear what you're saying, but if you don't, and even if you can't, on a D'Oraisa level, you definitely still have a Chiyuv, and are definitely Yotzei, and then a Cherish that couldn't hear what he says would definitely have to say Kriya Shema. And we pointed out, I believe, in the Gemara, we really see explicitly both sides of the coin. Because in the beginning of the Sugya, we had said, and in the beginning of the Sugya we had said, let's see where it is on the, if you want to see where it is on the outline, in the beginning of Sugya we had said, on line 3, that the Tanakam, which is the Shita of Yehuda, holds that we don't darshan from Shema, that you have to hear what you're saying. And so that's not a drasha. He doesn't hold the drasha. If he doesn't hold the drasha, that means that even on a D'Oraisa level, you don't have to hear what you're saying. However, when we spoke about the Shita of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who is that same Shita, right, so we came out, and that's on line 16, 17, over there, we said, Sarich Sheshma La'azno, right, it's on line 17, that he does need to hear what he's saying, L'chachila, Shenemar Shema Yisrael, because he does darshan Shema Yisrael. So we see within the same Shita that at one point in the Gemara it says that he doesn't darshan that pasuk, which would imply that what you have to hear l'chachila is only D'Rabbanan. And later in the Gemara it says that he does darshan the pasuk, which implies a D'Oraisa. Right? So we saw that difficulty in the Gemara, and we also spoke about the idea that it's a little bit difficult to say that there's such a thing as a din D'Oraisa, which is only l'chachila. Generally, all dinim D'Oraisa are even b'diavad, except by kachim. It's a special thing by kachim that you need two psukim where it teaches that something is ma'aki, but it doesn't work that way generally. So we're going to have to discuss that issue. And we also discussed one other issue I think we discussed, which was Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef in the end threw us a little bit of that we didn't really review tonight yet, but Rav Yosef in the end was trying to say that Kriya Shema and all mitzvahs might not be the same. The Sugya, up until that point, which seems to be the sheet of Rav Chisda and Rav Masna, they seem to be lumping all the mitzvahs together. Kriya Shema, Megillah, Bracha on Truma, and benching, Berachas HaMazon, lump them all together. At the end, Rav Yosef is saying don't seem to be really the same. And the Shagsariya pointed out that it seems clear that you can't learn other mitzvahs from Kriya Shema. Even within Kriya Shema itself, we saw a Gemara that you can't learn from one parsha to another parsha about whether you have to say the words out loud or not. So that's also going to be a difficulty. We have to figure out how come the Gemara, up until Rav Yosef, is matching different dinim to the halach of Kriya Shema when it seems that shouldn't be so. So he goes through two ways of understanding the sugya. There's lots of details, in understanding the sugya. We have to understand the shita of Rav Yossi, we have to understand the shita of Rav Yehuda, and so I'm presenting it as two separate shitas. There's a little bit of confusion in my mind if some of the details are not necessarily connected to each shita. Right? In other words, maybe he presents it as these two separate mahalchim, but each mahalch has many different factors to it. So I don't know that they're all dependent on one another. It's going to take a little more thought on my part. Some of them definitely are. So we'll go through it that way. Two separate mahalchim, and each mahalch is going to have all these different details to figure out all of these different pratim. The first mahalch is based on the explanation of the Rashba, and the Rashba is going, and according to this explanation, it's going to come out that that which you have to hear, what you say that you have to say Kriya Shema loud enough to hear, is going to be a din d'oraisa, l'chachila. Okay, and the way the Rashba works is as follows. He holds that the drasha of Shema really is to teach us, even according to Rav Yossi, is to teach us that you could be yotzei in any language. Right? There's no explicit drasha teaching us that you have to say Kriya Shema out loud. Right? So that's what we said in the beginning of the Gemara, right, which on the outline is, number 2, 3, and 4, that the reason for Rav Yossi is because of the drasha of Shema. It's really lav dafka. The drasha is really like what the Tanna Kama holds on line 2. Everyone holds that Shema means b'chol lashon shatu shemea. It just happens to be that Rav Yossi holds that there's no difference between thinking and speaking in a way where you can't hear. He's going to hold that those two things are the same, which we saw a little bit of a hint to that in the Gemara, which we'll get to also later. So therefore, you really have two possibilities. Either you could think Kriya Shema, or you have to say Kriya Shema loud enough that you can hear. And the Rashba maintains that if the Torah is discussing what language Kriya Shema needs to be in, that means that Kriya Shema needs to be spoken. Because if Kriya Shema can be thought, then it doesn't need to be in any specific language. That's what the Rashba understands. So the fact that the Torah teaches us that Kriya Shema can be said in any language, from there we see that Kriya Shema has to be said out loud. Because language is only connected to speech. Language is not connected to thought. That's the way the Rashba understands. And he has a slightly different girsa in the Gemara on what we have in the outline, line number 4, where we said Rav Yossi Tarti Shema Mina. Rav Yossi holds two drashas, which we explained when we saw the Gemara. It's a little bit difficult to learn two things from the same pasuk. It does happen occasionally, but it's not the standard way of explaining machlokes. Standard way we would explain Tanna Kama learns one thing, Rav Yossi learns a different thing. Here Rav Yossi is learning two things. So the Rashba actually has a different girsa, and he says Rav Yossi Mimela Shmas Mina B'chol Lashon Shatu Shemea. Rav Yossi Mimela learns that you could say it in any language. So the way the Rashba understands that line is that one is learned from the other. It's not that he learns two things, two separate, non-connected items from one pasuk. He's learning one thing from the pasuk, but it memela rolls into the next din. Now, so he learns that you can say Kriya Shema in any language. Once we're talking about language, so then we know that it has to be spoken. Now, it's a little bit backwards, I think, the lashon that the girsa that the Rash was using. Right? Remember, the Rash is not inventing a girsa. He is using a girsa that was already in existence and saying that that's the preferred girsa because of his explanation. So, according to the Rashba, if I were to be making up a girsa according to the Rashba, I would have said the other way around. That I know that it's in any language, and therefore, mimela, we see that it has to be spoken. Right? Because that's the way the Rash is explaining. The real drasha is the language. And then, language means speaking. That's not really the lashon of the girsa. His girsa said the opposite. Memela shmas mina b'chol lashon shatu shemea. Memela, we understand that it's in any language. So that part's a little bit difficult in the Rashba. I actually now popped into my head a possible reading of that girsa according to the Rashba might be Rav Yossi Memela shmas mina. That Rav Yossi Memela knows his din, the Iker din we're talking about, which is that you have to say Kriya Shema loud enough to hear, b'chol lashon shatu shemea, from the din of kol lashon shatu shemea. It's a little bit of a funny way of reading that line of the Gemara according to the Gersa of the Rashba, but if you read it that way, then it would come out the way the Rashba is explaining, which I guess is what we're trying to do. So therefore, it's true that you can't learn anything out from Kriya Shema. Right? That was one of our main issues. How do you learn anything out from Kriya Shema? Why is the Gemara bringing in all of these other dinim and seemingly saying that they have the same din as Kriya Shema? So according to the way the Rashba understands, it's true, we can't learn anything from Kriya Shema, but what could we do? Anything that we have a drasha that it could be said in any language, or that it has to be said in a specific language, anytime there's a din in the Torah, which there's a drasha that tells us about language equals spoken out loud language. That's the way we explained according to Rav Yossi. And therefore, all of the dinim that we spoke about like Megillah and Birchas Hamazon, where we darshan from the Psukim that they can be said in any language, just like Kriya Shema, so then Memela we're going to know, according to the Svar of the Rashba, Memela we're going to know that it has to be spoken out loud. Because language, according to the Rashba, is only shayach in a situation where it's being spoken out loud. So therefore it's true that I can't take any din and start discussing it in this sugya, but I can take any din that there's a drush about language. Right? So that's how all of these sugyas, according to Rav Chisda, match the din of Kriya Shema, but it wouldn't be a universal thing. That just because by Kriya Shema you have to hear what you're saying, therefore everything you have to hear what you're saying. No. Everything that we know there's a din of language, you have to hear what you're saying. That's what would come out according to the Rashba. Now, that explains the Shita of Rav Yossi. How would we explain the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda? That l'chachila, you have to hear what you say, but b'diavad, you don't have to hear. So, according to the way the Rashba understands, we could find, remember we were bothered by, is it possible to have a din l'chachila that's a diraisa, something that's learned from a pasuk, and it's only l'chachila, but it's not ma'akiv. So according to this mahalach, we could say that yes, it does work that way, specifically by this drasha. He's basically going to hold the same as Rav Yossi. However, he's going to say as follows. According to the Rashba, we didn't have a actual drasha to teach us this din that you have to speak Kriya Shema out loud in the way you could hear it. We didn't have a drasha telling us that. It was something we were able to understand ourselves from the fact that the Torah spoke about what language you say Kriya Shema in. So that type of din, where I don't have a drasha, the Torah never told me it explicitly, so then it's shayach for me to say on that din that that's really only a l'chachila din and not b'diavad. Because even if the Torah would only require me to say Kriya Shema out loud l'chachila, I still need to know what language to say it in when I'm being yotzei Kriya Shema l'chachila. Right, so since the Torah never told me I have to say Kriya Shema out loud, so it's not ma'akiv. The Torah only spoke about what language to say it in. What language is shayach if I l'chachila have to say Kriya Shema out loud, and therefore that's the minimum that I know about saying it out loud, and therefore I'm not going to learn from there that saying it out loud is ma'akiv, because if the Torah said I have to say it out loud, then it would for sure be ma'akiv. The Torah never told me that. The Torah only roundabout, since it spoke about language, therefore I understand that it has to be spoken out loud. So that which I understand but is not spoken out in the Torah may be l'chachila and not ma'akiv, even though all other dinim d'oraisa are generally ma'akiv. That would explain that detail that we were missing. Once we're on the topic, we'll explain the sheet of Rabbi Meir, which not really so nogea for our discussion, but just to fully understand the way the Rashba understands the sugya, is Rabbi Meir, who holds that you don't have to speak it out loud enough to hear, even though Rabbi Meir is going to have to hold that Shema teaches us I can say Kriya Shema in any language, right? So he also holds there's a din of language. So how come he doesn't hold you have to say it out loud? That's because Rabbi Meir is going to hold that there's a difference between thinking and speaking quietly, right? So thinking, right, has nothing to do with language, according to the Rashba. But speaking quietly does have to do with language, and therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, he would say, it's true that the Torah speaks about which language you say Kriya Shema in. It doesn't tell me I have to say it out loud. I could also say it softly. Because softly is not the same as thinking. Right? So Rav Yossi said, and Rabbi Yehuda said, thinking is the same thing as speaking quietly, and therefore, if you can't think, that means you can't speak quietly either, and therefore it means you have to say it loud. But Rabbi Meir says, no, it's not true, that we see from the Torah that you can't think, but saying it softly is allowed. That would be the shita of Rabbi Meir. Okay, so that's the explanation of the Rashba, and from this explanation we have this ability to explain that saying Kriya Shema out loud l'chachila is a dioraisa din, right? And that would come out lahalacha, the cherish, the person who can't hear but he could speak, would not be able to say Kriya Shema. That's what would come out according to this Rashba. Now we have a few questions against the Rashba, and then we'll get into the explanation of the Shagas Aryeh. So the first question that he asks against the Rashba is from the case of Megillah. We said the Cheresh who is reading the Megillah, so we wanted to say maybe it's like the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and only Lechatchila the Cheresh cannot say Kriya Shema, but B'diavad he would be Yotzei. So that's on line 23, right? Reminder of Yossi Diavad Namilo, Dilmer Rabbi Yehuda he Lechatchilahu Diavad Shaper Dami. So according to the way the Rashba said, is according to Rabbi Yehuda, I have to hear what I'm saying Lechatchila Dioraisa. Therefore, a Cheresh should not be able to be Yotzei, right? Because he's not even Roy to be able to hear what he says. So how come we have this Havamin in the Gemara, and it actually turns out to be the case, according to the Maskana, that Rabbi Yehuda, Mishnah could be Rabbi Yehuda, and that you could say the Cheresh would be Yotzei Megillah B'diavad. Right? How could that be? If it's a din d'oraisa, he needs to hear what he's saying, L'chachila, then it would only not be ma'afi by someone that has the ability to hear what he's saying, but by a Cheresh, he would not be able to be Yotzei. So that's a difficulty from that line of the Gemara. Now, he seems, the Shagas Aryeh seems not to be terribly bothered by this question, because he could say that's really only according to some sort of Havamina, but L'maskana, it doesn't work out that way. Maybe in the Havamina we think that the din of Rabbi Yehuda is only a din d'Rabbanan, and L'maskana we come out that it's a d'oraisa. Maybe we could say that. And that could possibly be an answer to that question. We have another proof, another question against the Rashba from a Gemara in Brachos Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, and that's Os Gimel in the Ma'ar Makomos, and it says as follows: Tana Rabbanon, Kriya Shema Kiksava. Kriya Shema has to be the way it's written. It means it has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. Divrei Rebbe. It's the opinion of Rebbe. Right? Different than all the cheetahs we saw up until now that says you could say it in any language you understand. The Chacham Omer B'chol Lashon. The Chacham hold you could say it in any language. My time of the Rebbe. What's the reason for the Shita Rebbe? Amar Krav V'hayu. The pasuk says V'hayu, and they will be. V'haviyas and Yehu. That implies that they are the way that they are. They will remain the way that they're written. You have to say it exactly in that Lashon HaKodesh. Rabbanan my taimai, what's the sheet of the Rabbanan? Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Shema b'chol lashon shata shomea, that you can say Kriya Shema in any language you can understand, like we spoke about. Rabbi nami haksiv Shema, what does Rabbi do with the pasuk of Shema? Ahumi bailei, he needs it, of hishama la'aznecha ma shata musa mipicha, that you need to hear what you're saying. If a Rabbanan savri lahu, command amar lo ishmi lazu yotze. The Rabbanan, they hold that even if you don't hear what you're saying, you're yotze. So over here in this Gemara, this is anyway something that has to be worked out. In this Gemara, it sounds like Shema is one or the other. It either teaches me that I have to hear what I'm saying, I have to say Kriya Shema loudly, or it's teaching me that I am allowed to say Kriya Shema in any language. It's one or the other, right? Not like we saw in our Gemara that Rav Yossi somehow learns both. So why is it that in our Sugi Rav Yossi learns both? So Rashi explains in our Gemara, I don't think I have it copied here, but Rashi explains that the reason why our Gemara says Rav Yossi learns both, even though really the Gemara could have said Rav Yossi just learns that you have to say Kriya Shema out loud, like the Shita of Rebbe, and maybe you have to say Kriya Shema in Hebrew, according to Rav Yossi. Right? Why does our Gemara go and make up a new Shita within Rav Yossi that he holds that you can learn both from Kriya Shema? So Rashi says it's a technicality. We would rather explain Rav Yossi according to the halacha. The halacha is like the Chachamim, that you can say Kriya Shema in all languages. So therefore we prefer to say within Rav Yossi, not that he holds completely like the Shita of Rebbe, but he'll hold like Rebbe in as much as you have to hear what you're saying, but he won't hold like Rebbe, and he'll also learn two things from Shema, also learn that you can say Kriya Shema in any language. So we just want to make Rav Yossi like the shita of the Chachamim, because that would be the halacha. However, according to the Rashba, it's much more difficult, because according to the Rashba, Rav Yossi anyway is not going to be la halacha if we learn both from one pasuk. As we explained, the reason why Rav Yossi can attach the two dinim together is because he holds thinking is the same thing as saying Kriya Shema softly. So since those are the same thing, so the fact that I'm talking about language must mean that I can't be thinking it. If I can't be thinking it, that means I also can't be saying it softly. It means I have to say it out loud. That whole string of logic is not la halacha, because we hold thinking is not the same thing as speaking softly. So according to Rashi, we're just taking a halacha, which is la halacha, and applying it to Rav Yossi, right? So even though that doesn't fit into the discussion that we had in Gimel and Aleph, but we're just taking a halacha which is true and attaching it to the shita Rav Yossi. That makes sense. But according to the Rashi, I'm not just taking a halacha which is true and attaching it to shita Rav Yossi. I'm taking a halacha which is true and attaching it to shita Rav Yossi through a logic which isn't true la halacha. And so what did I accomplish by making Rav Yossi a new shita that has two drashas that doesn't make him la halacha? Maybe lemaskana, it turns out that din is la halacha, that you're allowed to say Kriya Shema in any language. But the way that the Rashba puts it together does not work through the root, which is la halacha. So what did we accomplish by doing that? That seems to be the question of the Shaagat on the Rashba. It's a little bit of a complicated question, but hopefully I explained it enough that you can understand a little bit. The main issue that the Shaagat has with the Rashba, which was my issue also when I saw the Rashba, is the Rashba is going with a logic, which seems to be that he made up, which is language is only applicable to something which is spoken. Something which is thought, it's not applicable language. And it would seem, at least the way my brain works, and the Shaagat seems to work that way also, is that's not accurate. A person thinks in a language. Right? If I would have to think through the words of Kriya Shema without saying anything in my head, I could think through the words in Hebrew. Or I could think in English. Or in another language. Right? People think in a language. You could possibly think of things conceptually without a language, maybe. But the concept of thinking Kriya Shema may be that I have to think the words of Kriya Shema in a specific language, or in any language. The din of language doesn't teach me anything about whether I'm allowed to say Kriya Shema by thought or by speech, because thought also is applicable to speech. And he brings a proof to this, because there is an opinion that thought is the same thing as speaking. Right? I don't know if we saw it inside. We saw it inside, I think, at some point in the past 8 weeks. But I don't remember if we saw anything specifically here, but we spoke about it already in this year. There is an opinion that thinking counts as if you spoke it. And according to that shita, what would he learn from the pasuk of Shema? Shema Yisrael. What does he darshan from Shema? We only have two possible ways of darshaning Shema. Either you have to hear what you're saying, or it's talking about which language to say it in. That you can say it in any language. So according to the opinion that I'm allowed to think Kriya Shema, there is a shita like that. So that means that he can't be darshaning that I have to say Kriya Shema out loud. He has to darshan it means that I say Kriya Shema in any language. So we see from the Gemara itself that there's an opinion that I can think Kriya Shema, and nevertheless I need a din that I'm allowed to think in any language. Right? So besides for the fact that just logically doesn't seem to be, the Rashba doesn't seem to make sense, but we even have a proof from the Gemara that the two things are not connected. You could have an idea of thinking in a language. Everyone agree with that? Okay. Fine. So that clears the Rashba shita. Now we're going to explain the Gemara according to a whole new mahalach, the mahalach of the Shaagat. And the Shaagat explains as follows. The truth is that Rav Chisda of Masna, that are comparing all the different dinim to Kriya Shema, they don't hold of the first line of the Gemara. The first line of the Gemara threw us off. We explained on the first line of the Gemara, my time to review this, Mishum Dechsiv Shema, Misham La'azach HaMashat HaMotzi Picha. That's not 100% accurate. In fact, Rav Yossi really darshans from the pasuk of Haski to Shema Yisrael. which was a pasuk we saw later on in the Gemara, even after this whole outline, where Rav Yosef says that all other mitzvos could possibly be learned out. It was a Havamina of Yosef. Yosef did not hold this lamaskana, that all other mitzvos possibly you have to hear what you're saying from the pasuk of Haskis to Shema Yisrael. And Rav Yossi, according to Rav Chisda, that's Rav Yossi's drasha. Rav Yossi holds everything you have to hear what you're saying because of the pasuk of Haskis to Shema Yisrael. And he brings a similar idea from a Yerushalmi in Trumos. I didn't print it out. Don't know why. It's just a short Yerushalmi, so I'll just read what I have in my notes. Min Manda Amar of Masna. Right, here's also Rav Masna. Right, so it's the same sheet as who is speaking in our Gemara in the Bavli. Rav Yossi he. It's a sheet of Rav Yossi. Hada Amra he Kriya Shema he Shar Mitzvah Shabbat. The same halacha applies by Shema as by all other mitzvahs in the Torah. My time to Rav Yossi, what's the reason for Rav Yossi? V'hazanta l'mitzvosav, that you have to listen to the mitzvos. Shma la'aznecha mashapicha medaber. What that teaches us is you have to hear what your mouth is saying. So, our Gemara doesn't bring this drasha of hazanta l'mitzvosav. Our Gemara has different drasha of the Haskisu Shema. But the common denominator would be that Rav Masna, who's the same Shita, who's speaking in our Gemara, he holds that Rav Yossi has a blanket drasha which covers all mitzvahs in the Torah that says that you have to hear what you're saying. However, the Shagat he doesn't want to completely disregard the fact that our Gemara does say that Rav Yossi darshans the word Shema from the pasuk of Shema Yisrael. So therefore he wants to say as follows. Haskes Ushma Yisrael teaches us that you need to say everything out loud. It repeats it again by Kriya Shema, that you have to say it out loud with the pasuk of Shema Yisrael, and that teaches us that by Kriya Shema specifically it's ma'akiv. By all other mitzvahs it's only going to be l'chachila. Right? If it was only one pasuk to teach us, again we hold except for Kadshin. If I have one pasuk, regular drasha, it teaches us that it has to be that way, and if you don't do it that way, it's ma'akiv, you're not yotzei. But here, since I have two drashas, one drasha for Kol HaTorah Kula, and another drasha for specifically Shema, that would teach us that Shema is ma'akiv. I don't need two psukim to teach us Shema is ma'akiv, but the fact that it gave me two psukim is to show us that only Shema is ma'akiv, and by all other mitzvahs it's only l'chachila. However, that's only going to work. Now, once we have this idea that by all other mitzvos it is only a din l'chachila, but it's a diraisa din l'chachila, so now we go back to the svara that we've been speaking about the past few weeks of kol haroi lebila ein bila ma'akeves, which is that if I would have someone deaf, then even by all other mitzvos he wouldn't be able to be yotzei by speaking in a way where he can't hear it. Since he can never hear what he says, he's doesn't have the ability to do it in the l'chachila fashion, and it's a l'chachila which is mandated by the Torah. Therefore, even b'diavad, he's not going to be yotzei, and therefore the Gemara compares Kriya Shema to a case of a cheresh by truma, right? Because a cheresh by other mitzvos is going to have the same din as Kriya Shema, even by a non-cheresh, right? But other mitzvos, if it wasn't a cheresh, it would be a different din. That's the way he's explaining. So we understand the case of the cheresh who is being mafresh truma. We understand the case of the cheresh who's reading the Megillah. But we have a little bit of a problem from line 12 in the outline of we ask the question of lo yavarich adam birchas hamazon belibo then birich yatsa. A person should not say Kriya Shema by heart, and if he does say Birchas Hamazon, he shouldn't say Birchas Hamazon in his thoughts, in Hirhor, but if he does, he's Yotzei, and we said money, lo Rav Yossi or Yehuda, can't be Rav Yossi. And we said, because the Rav Yossi, Diavad Nami Lo. According to Rav Yossi, he's not Yotzei B'Diavad. Now why is that so? According to what we've said up until now, if he was a Cheresh, he wouldn't be able to Yotzei B'Diavad. If it was Kriya Shema, he wouldn't be able to Yotzei B'Diavad. But if it's just the case of the Brisa, which doesn't seem to be talking about a Cheresh, So you should be able to Yotzei B'diavad. So why did the Gemara get stuck on that point, according to the way the Shagas Aryeh is explaining? So he explains that the Gemara is making a diuk. When it says Birchas Hamazon Belibo, I think we explained, I don't know if we explained fully, but we touched on the idea that there really are three levels. There's thinking, speaking softly, and speaking loudly. Up until this point in the Gemara, we've been discussing the difference between speaking softly and speaking loudly. Here we're introducing thinking, Birchas Hamazon. The Gemara seems to say it's the same thing as speaking softly. That's what it's seen from the Gemara. So most of you Rishonim explain that it's not true. We don't hold it that thinking is the same thing as speaking softly. We don't hold that way, because we hold speaking softly you're Yotzei, thinking you're not Yotzei. So rather they say when it says Belibo, it really means speaking softly. That's the way the Ben Yonah explains. Other Mefarshim explain that way as well. But it's a little bit of a dochak to say that when it says Belibo, that means you're speaking it, you just are speaking it softly. Therefore, the Shagas Aryeh wants to explain it kipshuto. It means actually thinking. And what's the diuk? The diuk is that if it wanted to teach us, like the Shita of Yossi, that since it's not Kriya Shema, I can be Yotzei by speaking softly, then it should have said the din of saying Birchas Hamazon softly. It didn't say saying Birchas Hamazon softly. It said thinking Birchas Hamazon. So why is it going to that case? So if it's according to Rav Yehuda, it does work out well, because Rav Yehuda holds that Dirabanan, right? We didn't really start explaining Shitas Rav Yehuda, but we're working up to the idea that Rav Yehuda holds that which you need to say Kriya Shema loudly is only a din Dirabanan. So then I can understand why we need to teach us a din that you should not say Kriya Shema by thinking. According to Yossi, it's not necessary. I already know I'm not supposed to say Kriya Shema softly, so certainly I shouldn't say Kriya Shema l'chachila thinking. According to Yehuda, since it's only a din d'Rabbanan, if we say, throwing this in now, if we say that this lo yavarich adam is referring to a cheresh, then I can understand this brisa according to the Shita of Yehuda, because a cheresh is not able to speak loudly. I mean, he can speak loudly, but it's not halachically considered loudly. He can't hear what he's saying. Right? So halachically is considered speaking softly. I think it's the language that I'm using now, thinking softly and loudly. Loud, so then soft is, a cheresh can never do more than soft because he can't hear what he's saying. So, if it's talking about a cheresh who cannot speak loudly, the din d'Rabbanan is you have to say loudly. That's the din d'Rabbanan. You do have to say loudly. The cheresh cannot. So does he have to at least say it softly? Does he at least have to speak it out with his lips, even though he's not going to be able to hear what he's saying? So we don't know. Maybe Chazal only mandated us to say, in this case, Birchas Hamazon or anything. Once it's a d'Rabbanan, so it goes across the board. All dinim are going to be the same. So by Birchas Hamazon, that which I have to say Birchas Hamazon out loud, that's the din d'Rabbanan. But if I can't fulfill that, so maybe I don't have to do anything, maybe I can just think it. Kamash Malon, the Brisa, that nevertheless, he's still not supposed to think Kriya Shema. He still should do as much as he can, which is to say it without being able to hear what he says. Right? That's also something that has to do with Achila D'Rabbanan. That's a Chiddush, according to Yehuda, because I could have thought if I can't fulfill the D'Rabbanan the way it was Masakin, so then I don't have to do it at all. So then I could just think Birchas Hamazon just as easily. I can say it softly. Either way, I'm not doing it the way Chazal want me to do it. L'chachila, l'chachila. Right? Because we're talking about a cheresh. That's the way. That's the way the Shagas Aryeh understands that line, and therefore now the line reads well. That if it's according to Rav Yossi, so then even b'di'eved he cannot say Birchas Hamazon because it's a cheresh. Right? The only way we could explain this brisa if it's talking about a cheresh, and as we explained, according to Rav Yossi, once it's a cheresh, so therefore since he can't do it the l'chachila way, so he can't do it at all. He's not yotzei at all because of the concept of kol she'eino roy lebila. But according to Rav Yehuda, it could make sense that this din of the Mishnah that l'chachila you should say Kriya Shema out loud. Even the cheresh should be saying Kriya Shema out loud. Okay, so that's the explanation of that mahalach according to the Shagas Aryeh. And all this din d'oraisa is only within Shitas Rav Yossi. Within the Shita Rav Yehuda, it's all only a din d'Rabbanan. You have to hear what you're thinking, lichachila d'Rabbanan. But b'diavad you're yotzei, and d'oraisa you don't have to hear what you're saying at all, and therefore a cheresh could be yotzei Kriya Shema on the d'oraisa level by saying Kriya Shema, even though he can't hear what he's saying, because there's no din of kol she'ein aroi labila. Because after all, it's not a din d'oraisa that he has to hear what he's saying, even on a lechatchila level. So the Shagas Aryeh wants to point out that this is the seems to be the shita also of Tosfos and Rashi, right? Because up until now we had a machlokas Rashba, who's a Rishon, against the Shagas Aryeh. Now, of course, the Shagas Aryeh himself, I don't know if that bothers him so much. I like to argue with a Rishon, but it's always nice if you can find that there are other Rishonim that agree with you. So let's see let's see Tosfos first, which is Os Daled in the Mara Makomos, that he says over there, and that's going back on the Gemara that we actually just saw, right, in the previous Mara Makom, the two Shitas, Rabbi and the Chachamim. So the Chachamim say you say Kriya Shema in any language. Omer Hari, the Ri says, the Halacha Chachamim, that's the Halacha, that you can say Kriya Shema in any language. Why? So one reason is the halacha Rebbe mechavei rov v'lo mechavei rav. The halacha is like Rebbe only when he disagrees with an individual, but not when he disagrees with the rabbim, in this case the chachamim. The od, this is the part that we need. Another reason the halacha should be like the chachamim. D'Rabbanan svir lehu k'man amar lo hishmil aznu yatsa. The kavod say paskinan lekaman. The Rabbanan hold like the shita that if you can't hear what you're saying, you're still yotzei, and that's the way we paskin later on. Right? What does it mean that's the way we paskin later on? We paskin like the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the middle shita. You have to hear what you are saying, l'chachila, but b'diavad it's not ma'akiv. Is that din a d'oraisa or a d'Rabbanan according to Tosfos? According to Tosfos, he's matching that shita with the shita of Chachamim on Daf Yud Gimel, who says that we darshan the word Shema only to teach us what language to say Kriya Shema in, but we do not darshan Shema to teach us that you have to hear what you say. Even l'chachila we're not darshaning that way, because that's not the drasha. And therefore, that which we paskin, Tosfos is matching Shitas Chachamim, that don't have a drasha at all for hearing what you say, is matching that with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, who says you do have to hear what you say, l'chachila. So within the drashas they're the same, it's just that Rabbi Yehuda has a din d'Rabbanan that you have to hear what you say. That's the diak that we have from Tosfos, that Tosfos holds that Rabbi Yehuda shita that you have to say Kriya Shema loud enough to hear is only d'Rabbanan. It's not learned from the Psukim at all. It's very clear from this Tosfos because he's matching, again, the shita of Chachamim that don't make that drasha to the shita, on Yigimel Aleph, to the shita of Rabbi on Tetzvav Amud Aleph. So he's holding Rabbi also does not make that drasha. Okay, so that's the proof from Tosfos. The proof from Rashi is really based on mostly that question that we asked earlier about that question that the Gemara asked about Megillah, that the Cheresh reading the Megillah, we wanted to say maybe could work according to Rabbi Yehuda, because and the Mishnah is going to say that l'chachila he shouldn't say the Megillah, but b'diavad he's yotzei the Megillah. And a Cheresh, we said that only would work if the requirement is d'Rabbanan, to speak loudly, because then you don't have this problem of kol she'ein aroi labila. And we had a little bit of a difficulty in the Rashi when we had to say maybe the Rashi holds that line of the Gemara is only according to a Havamina, but that line of the Gemara is not according to the Maskana. We're going to bring a Rashi that holds no, that line of the Gemara is according to the Maskana, and it could be, as we explained, it could only be understood with the explanation of the Shagas Aryeh. So let's see it inside. Os Hein the Mara Makomos Afilu Tamer Yehuda Damar Kriya Shema Yotza Di'eved in l'chachila lo. He holds that Kriya Shema you can be Yotze b'di'eved but not l'chachila. Umasnisin de Megillah l'chachilahu de Pasal l'cheresh. The Mishnah in Megillah is talking about l'chachila. Rabbi Yehudi and it's the opinion of Yehuda. The Ha de Berchas Hamazon Nami Rabbi Yehuda. He and also the case of Berchas Hamazon is Rabbi Yehuda. And that which we asked, how do Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yishmael Pazi money or Meir he, right in the Mekel Shita by being mafresh trum is the shita Rabbi Meir, the mashal chachila. So here, right, this is Rashi summing up the maskana of the Gemara, right? After we have all the three different shitas and now matching, so going back and matching each of the Mishnayos, Rashi, even according to the maskana of the sugya, is willing to say that the Mishnah Megillah could possibly be shita Rabbi Yehuda, to say that l'chachila you have to hear what you're saying, but the chayreish who can't can still be yotzei b'diavad, which implies that this din of l'chachila b'diavad, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is only a din d'Rabbanan, because as we kept explaining, if it was a din d'Oraisa, you'd have the problem of kol she'einu roi lebila, and a chayreish would not be able to say the Megillah. So those are our two rayas, one from Tosfos and one from Rashi, like the shita of the Shagas Aryeh, not like the Rashba. Another proof is going to be that we can understand very well, according to the shita of the Shagas Aryeh, the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis, which is the 6th Gemara Makom. And the Gemara there brings a Mishnah, Bal Keri Mahar Believe Vein Mevarech Lo L'Fanav Achraha. A Bal Keri who has an Isser to say Divrei Torah, he thinks Kriya Shema, but not the Brachos. And let's skip to the Gemara. Amar Rabina Zoso Maris, hear her Kedirudam. We see from here, thinking is like speaking. If it's not like speaking, why should you even think Kriya Shema? Elamai, so what does Ravina hold? Here Kedibradami, that thinking is the same thing as speaking. Yotzi b'sfasav, so then he should just say Kriya Shema. If it's the same thing, thinking and speaking, so just say Kriya Shema. So our answer is Keda Ashacham b'Sinai. It's like we find by Har Sinai. It was the whole Isser of Al-Kari to say Divrei Torah is learned out from a pasuk by Har Sinai. By Har Sinai there were spoken words of Torah. They weren't words of Torah only in thought. Therefore, there is no Isser for Baal Keri to think words of Torah. Therefore, he thinks Kriya Shema. He's Yotzei that way, and he doesn't run into the issue of being a Baal Keri. So that's the pashtus of the Gemara, the way we just explained it, but it's difficult. Because if thinking is the same thing as saying, and there's no Isser to think Divrei Torah for a Baal Keri, so then why would the Mishnah say that the Baal Keri does not say the brachos of Kriya Shema? Let him think the brachos of Kriya Shema, and that's what he has to do. Just like by Kriya Shema itself, we said he's 100% Yotzei by thinking, and he's 100% not over the Isser of being a Baal Keri by thinking, right? So it's 100% fine. So then do the same thing by the brachos. Why the brachos no, not to think the Berachos Kriya Shema, but yes to think Kriya Shema itself. So he says you could explain that this shita will hold thinking your Yotzei b'diavad, but l'chachila you have to say the words of Kriya Shema or the brachos of Kriya Shema, and that would be the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, right? As we've explained, the shita that we hold of, that l'chachila you have to say things out loud, but b'diavad you can be Yotzei even by thinking. On a din d'Rabbanan would be shaykh roi lebila on a d'Rabbanan level, meaning, right? What we've been saying up until now is, if it's only a din d'Rabbanan that I have to hear l'chachila what I'm saying, so it's not going to knock out a mitzvah d'Oraisa, right? So therefore a chayrish still would have the mitzvah of Kriya Shema d'Oraisa, even though d'Rabbanan he can't even fulfill the l'chachila d'Rabbanan. He's not even doesn't have the ability to fulfill the din d'Rabbanan l'chachila, but that doesn't affect his chiyuv l'gabi the din d'Oraisa. So if we have the beer, but when it comes to din d'Rabbanan, let's say it was a din d'Rabbanan, so then it would be ma'akiv. So if a chayrish, if a person would l'chachila supposed to say, let's say for example, the birchas Kriya Shema, which is only d'Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan themselves, who said you have to say Kriya Shema, the brachos of Kriya Shema, also say that you have to hear what you're saying, l'chachila. So then, on that d'Rabbanan level, a chirish is not fit to be Yotzei this din d'Rabbanan, l'chachila, and therefore he can't be Yotzei the din d'Rabbanan at all. He's completely uprooted from the mitzvah of birchas Kriya Shema. But Kriya Shema, which is a d'Oraisa, it's true on a d'Rabbanan level, he's not fit to be Yotzei the din of Kriya Shema, but Kriya Shema is a din d'Oraisa. So therefore, his chiyuv Lagabi, the Diorais is not changed. And therefore, since a Balkari is not allowed to say words of Torah Durabanan, it's a din Durabanan, so therefore we would say for him to think the brachos of Kriya Shema, he would not be Yotzei, because he doesn't have the ability to say the bracha of Kriya Shema, so therefore he can't be Yotzei even without saying it. But as far as Kriya Shema itself, which is a Dioraisa din, the fact that Chazal told him that he can't say the words of Kriya Shema is not going to uproot his chiyuv, and he still would have to be Yotzei by thinking. And again, this whole explanation of this Gemara only works if we assume that the idea that you have to say Kriya Shema out loud is a din d'Rabbanan, which was the shita of the Shagas Aryeh. The Shagas Aryeh brings one more raya, maybe two more rayas, maybe it's one raya together, and we'll see as we go through it, from a Gemara in Yavamas. And this is a raya that a cherish, even though he can't hear what he's saying, still can be yotzei dinim that have to be where he has to speak. And it says like this in Yavamas Daf Kuf Daled: cherish shenechlatz v'cherish shecholza. We're talking about doing chalitza. If it's a cherish or a chereshes, v'acholetzes min a katan or a katan, chalitzas psula. So then it's a pasal chalitza. Here we're talking about a cherish chereshes, meaning they can't hear and they can't speak. So they are like a katan, they don't have daf. Same thing with a katan himself. The chalitza doesn't work. Amar Rava, and Rava says, Hashda Marta Kriya Ma'akva, now that we know that reading the psukim of the chalitza is ma'akiv, then even if they just can't speak, their chalitza is possible, because they can't say the psukim. Umasniz like Rabbi Zera, and our Mishnah would be like Rabbi Zera. Damar of Zera, the Rabbi Zera says, Kol harai lebila ein bila ma'keves bo, v'chol she'ein rai lebila bila ma'keves. And the Mishnah would be like Rabbi Zera, means that which the speaking might not be ma'akiv, but it's at least l'chachila they have to say the psukim, and therefore the Elim who doesn't have the ability to say the psukim, he is not going to be able to do chalitza at all. That's the idea. So the mashmos of the Gemara, says the Shagas Aryeh, is that we're talking about someone that can't speak, but someone that just can't hear, but he could speak. The mashmos of the Gemara is that he would be able to do chalitza. Now, if what we're saying is true, that anytime the cherish, anytime we're dealing with a cherish that can't hear, so the fact that he could speak is not going to help him, because he doesn't have the ability to speak loud enough for himself to hear. It's just he doesn't have the ability to do that l'chachila way being yotz the mitzvah. So therefore, even b'diavad, he wouldn't be able to accomplish the mitzvah. So then it should say that even a chirish that can't hear but could speak also should not be able to do chalitza. Right? So the Gemara doesn't say that, and therefore from here we bring a diuk to this idea that a chirish really could be yotzei all of the mitzvahs that it says in the Torah that need to be spoken. And he brings another raya for this from the Rif. This is really just the way the Rif has the girsa in the Gemara in Yevamos Daf Kovavam Beis, and he says like this. Right. So this is the way we're going to see from the girsa of the Rif. There are other ways that this Gemara is understood, but we're going to read it from the way it is in the Rif. And from the Rif, we're going to see this also very clearly, that a cherish can do mitzvos that require dibur, even though the chachila you're supposed to be able to hear what you're saying. Amar Abaye, Haiman de Mikri get chalitza. So I got a little bit confused here. What he's bringing a proof from this Rif is the following. There are really there's really a way out of this Gemara that we just mentioned in Yevamos, because there's two steps that we don't have by other mitzvos. Right? By Kriya Shema, you have to say Kriya Shema, and there's a din l'chachila, you have to hear what you're saying. By chalitza, it's really like a two-step. You have to say the psukim l'chachila. B'diavad, if you don't say the psukim at all, the chalitza is valid. And then that which you have to say the psukim l'chachila, you have to say them out loud, right? Just like anything they have to say out loud. So over there, it's really more of a two-part process. Maybe in that situation we would say, since the cheresh is not able to say the psukim, so out loud, so then even if he says them quietly, it's as if he didn't say the psukim. But he'd still be able to do chalitza. You could do chalitza without saying the psukim. Right, so there's maybe that two-step ein roi labila we wouldn't say. Right, even though something you have to say, and l'chachila you're supposed to say it out loud. If you don't have the ability to say it out loud, so then you weren't yotzei, because it's something you do have to say. But if it's something that you don't have to say at all, I mean it's not ma'aki b'diavad, so maybe we wouldn't say this idea that since he can't do it l'chachila, so therefore it's not ma'akiv. Or you could say that no, l'chachila he's supposed to say the psukim of chalitza, and l'chachila he's supposed to say those psukim out loud. So if he can't do it l'chachila, so he can't do chalitza at all. Right? Maybe we would say like that. So those are the two ways of understanding how the idea of l'chachila and b'diavad would work in the situation of l'chachila and b'diavad. And he's going to bring a proof from the Rif, the way the Rif understands a different Gemara in Yevamos, that even by chalitza, where the whole reading of the psukim is only l'chachila, nevertheless, if we would have a situation of eino roi labila, then it would passel the whole chalitza, right? Which would be then the proof to what he was trying to bring from that Gemara on Kuf Dalet. So let's see it inside. Amar Abaye, Haiman the mikri get chalitza lo likri ledida lo lechudei avi yiv mi lechudei demashma avi yiv mi lo avi yiv mi vasakas. Okay, so one of the words that the woman has to say, one of the sentences is lo avi yiv mi, that my Yavam did not want to do Yibam, and that's why we're doing Chalitza. So that's part of what she has to say. Abaye says you have to make sure when you're telling her the words to say, don't say lo, and then she repeats after you lo, and then Ava Yivmi, and then she repeats after you Ava Yivmi, because if you separate the lo from the Ava Yivmi, so then the Ava Yivmi sounds like it stands alone, and that would sound like she's saying that he does want to do Yibam. It has to be read together. He doesn't want to do Yibam, not lo, he doesn't, and then a separate sentence of he wants to do Yibam. It has to be read all together. That's what Abaye says. Same thing when you're reading to the man the words that he has to say, you have to read it all together. Lo chafatzti l'kachta. I don't want to marry her. It has to be all together. I don't want to marry her. If you read it separately, so then it might sound like you're saying no on who knows what you're saying no about, and then a separate sentence that he does want to marry her. So therefore it all has to be read together. Rava Amar and Rava says Asuki Milsa Leslan Ba. It's just finishing up the sentence, and therefore it's not a problem, even if you separate it with a breath in between, but everyone understands that it all is together, and it means that he doesn't want to do the chalitza. So he disagrees with Abaye. Rav Ashi Ashachid Rav Kahana to come as Sarav Mikri Lo Avi Yivmi, and Rav Ashi saw that Rav Kahana was being medactic like Abaye to read it all together. Amar Lein, he said to him, Lo Sarval Amar Lo Hadarava, don't you hold like what Rava says, Amar Asuki Milsa Leslanba, that since it's all just finishing up the sentence, it doesn't make a difference if you split it up. Amar Lein, he said back to him, Moda Rava Lo Avi Yivmi. Rava agrees about the case of Lo Avi Yivmi, Dasuki Milsahu. Sorry, skipped. Right, Dasuka Milsahu Kirby Zira. He says it's true that you're just finishing up the sentence, but we would have to use Rav Zera's concept of Kol Haroy Labila. Hachanami, and therefore here as well. Roy Lemikri Vasachas Lo Ma'akva Kriyasa Vilo Ma'akva. Depends whether they have the ability to say it all at once or not. So therefore, the way it seems that he's understanding is that the man and men in general in that era were more educated than the women. So for the man, we understand we could read him a whole sentence at once and he'll be able to repeat it after us. And therefore we could say the whole sentence at once of Lo Chafatzi Lakachta he would be able to say that all at once. And therefore, if we read it to him one word at a time, that's okay, because he has the ability to say it all at once. This idea of ein bila ma'akeves, it's something that he has the ability to do, to say it all at once. L'chachila, that's really how he should say it. But if we split it up, it's not a problem. As opposed to a woman, this is what Rav Kahana was saying, is I have to make sure that she can say it all at once. Because if I don't make sure she can say it all at once, and we just say it word by word, maybe she doesn't have the ability to say it all at once. And if she doesn't have the ability to say it all at once, so then she wouldn't be yotzei even b'diavad. So what we see from this riff is that the psukim, even if she didn't say the psukim at all, she'd be yotzei. Nevertheless, we apply this idea of kol haray l'bilat. If she can't do it in the proper way, so then it passes the whole chalitza. Right? So that goes back to his proof from the Gemara on Kuf Daled, that he wanted to make a diak that a cheresh could do chalitza. So we see from there that the idea of having to hear what you have to say is only l'chachila, and it's only d'Rabbanan, because it's not ma'akev the cheresh for doing chalitza. So we come out from all of this is, according to the Shagas Aryeh, is the way he understands all of the Gemaras and all of the Sugyas is that a regular person has to say Kriya Shema out loud, l'chachila, only d'Rabbanan. It's not a d'Oraisa din. And therefore a cheresh, even though he can't say Kriya Shema out loud, still has the d'Oraisa din of saying Kriya Shema in a way where he cannot hear what he is saying. So that is the maskana of the Shagas Aryeh, that a cheresh does have the chiyuv of Kriya Shema, and he's yotzei Kriya Shema by saying it even though he can't hear what he's saying. This is just a thought that came to me when I was thinking of this shir right now, is I don't know if the whole premise of the Shagas Aryeh is necessarily correct, because the din that you have to hear what you say may not be a din, it might not be to understand that kapashas, that you have to hear what you're saying. For example, if you're saying Kriya Shema, the halacha is as follows: you're saying Kriya Shema, and they're doing construction right outside, and therefore it's very loud. And even though you're saying Kriya Shema loudly, you don't hear your own voice. I believe the poskim still speak out that that is considered reading Kriya Shema l'chachila, because you're saying it loud enough to hear. It's just a technicality you can't hear. If so, I'm wondering if by a cheresh you even have to come onto this whole thing to say that he's reading in a way which is only b'diavad. Maybe he's reading in a way which is even l'chachila. It's true, he technically can't hear what he's saying, but it's not because there's any problem in the way he's saying Kriya Shema. It's a problem in what he can hear. But his hearing is not part of the Shema. It's just a din of how many decibels you have to say Kriya Shema at. Right? You have to say Kriya Shema loud enough that a regular person can hear, and the cheresh is saying it. Right? So it's not even like he's saying it in a b'diavad way. He's a completely yotzei the din, even l'chachila. You can maybe say like that. In fact, and the reason why I'm thinking like this a little bit out of the box is because I didn't really see anyone discuss this. Normally when we discuss these different dinim in the Shagas Aryeh, especially where we see machlokas, so I like to take a look at my notes and try to see what did other poskim say about it. So we spoke about before, in this case, everyone's passing like the Shagas Aryeh in this case. Not everyone's passing the Shagas Aryeh. What about the case of a cheresh for Kriya Shema, a person that can hear but he can't, a person that can speak but he can't hear? No one speaks about it. Doesn't anyone speak about it. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't speak about it, doesn't mention it. Mishnah Berurah doesn't mention it. Nothing. I didn't see any poskim mentioning it at all. It could be because they hold it's not even a shaila, because the din of saying Kriya Shema loud enough for you to hear it doesn't mean you actually have to hear it. It's just a question of how loud to read it. And a cheresh that can speak, he can say Kriya Shema 100%, not a problem at all. So it's just a thought, and I wanted to share with that. Okay, we're starting